we'll send out a survey to everyone, both the students and faculty, about the seminar, asking for your thoughts, asking you maybe to think about particular sessions, thinking about the future also. One of the things that I've kind of recognized is that for some people, especially if you're in Norway, this is a better way of doing it, right? Than having it in person. So even going forward, continuing to have a way of doing it that is virtual, and then asking some other ideas. And then the recordings from all of the sessions will be posted also. So they will be up so that people can play them. I mean, they're long. I mean, we might do a little bit of editing, but not much. And they will be publicly accessible. But, you know, we were kind of told in the beginning that we would be recording everything. Going forward, we'll talk about that at the end. You know, I really kind of leave it up to kind of an organic organizing of faculty themselves in how they want to continue to organize. You should know that over the course of doing this seminar, we started in 2013, so now we're in the 8th year. We have probably close to 150 faculty. Some people come every year. Some people come every couple of years, but it's gotten to be about 150 community college faculty around the United States that are part of this. This is the first time we've had students come in, so smaller numbers of students. The faculty are not all in the United States, and in some years I've even had international faculty come. So there is a community out there, but I don't kind of monitor the community in a sense. I don't act as kind of a host or anything like that. But if somebody wanted to do something like that and wanted to kind of organize, that's great also. There are a lot of things that go on. There's a conference coming up in a couple of weeks that I don't want to forget to mention. It's PeaceCon 2020, which is the Alliance for Peacebuilding Conference in Washington. Of course, that's virtual. And that's December 6th and 7th, or 7th and 8th. I think it's 6th and 7th. And I'm doing a presentation there on careers. That tends to, and it's not that expensive this year. I think it's maybe $7,500. So just go to the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I'll put the link in before the end of the day. And the Alliance for Peacebuilding is a Washington, DC based policy group that kind of brings together kind of the international relations based peacebuilding community. So you have a lot of kind of State Department, diplomats, NGOs, lots of students. I'm actually doing a session there on careers. I'm actually having a panel discussion with actually Heather and Nanette are both part of it. So they were here the first day. They're going to be part of that also. And then I've got some other people I'm bringing in. But I can talk about some of those things at the end. Yeah, any observations from yesterday that might be insightful? State Department, we did 3 things yesterday. Dave Ragland, I really wanted to do it kind of unstructured with him. He's best that way, just asking him questions about what's going on. And he usually has a message he wants to get out. And I think that that's all fair, you know, and letting people kind of put out what he's focusing on is the Breathe Act and defunding police, which is a discussion I think, you know, is certainly something that falls within our kind of our scope of the things that we do. And then Holly from the Pulitzer Center, I thought really interesting. There was an article, it was interesting, EDS. There's an article in this month's, I want to say triple A magazine, kind of the Automobile Association of America, about EDS. Also, I did not know anything about it. And then the State Department, Lauren's really approachable. Anything that you want to kind of get back to her about things that you want to do. But I'll stop. Anything anybody want to raise from yesterday before we get going today? Observations, thoughts? Just open your mic is the easiest way of doing it. No?
I enjoyed hearing David Ragland's, all of the presentations have been great. Yeah, I liked just thinking about it because my students and I, you know, here in New York, there's a lot of buzz about it. There's protests every weekend, especially out in, you know, Union Square in Manhattan, and I'm on Long Island, but students are very hooked into this Black Lives Matter. And so we've been talking a lot about defunding the police and how even that word can be kind of misunderstood, right? If we think of it, it's taking all the money away from every police department, which
Yeah.
is a radical claim. But he was speaking of how I liked how he got into de-escalation techniques and topics, and then demilitarization. So these are just great things for us to start thinking about
Yeah.
in terms of being realistic about it.
Yeah. And I, the intersection of what you do, I mean, the idea that law enforcement associate's degree in criminal justice is a mainstay of every community college in the country. So
Yeah.
you can't help but have criminal justice students in your classroom at some point. If you're not teaching peace studies, you're teaching, your regular stuff, whatever that might be. So having these discussions with students who have expectations of law enforcement probably is even more significant. Yeah. Anybody else?
There's a really good book that I read. I'm sorry to miss Dave Ragland's presentation, but my son recommended a book called The End of Policing, which I really enjoyed reading, and I thought it was an easy read too.
Yeah, it was.
I've heard of that, Lena. I've heard of that. Who's the author? Who's the author on that?
Let me look it up. I can't remember now.
Yeah, if you figure it out, Lena, put it in the chat. But he did recommend that to us to read. Lena read it. I don't know if I got to it.
I think actually you can get it free online as a PDF.
Yeah, it was freely downloadable. Yeah. So anything else? Any other thoughts about Dave Ragland's presentation on defunding police, the Breathe Act, the Pulitzer Center, State Department?
Yes, actually.
Tulin, yeah.
Yeah. I had the same question I asked him, because he started very broad.
Yeah.
He started talking about truth and reconciliation. Then he went to reparations. And then actually his focus was just on policing. So what was his topic? Was it just policing? Or does he want to have a national truth and reconciliation conversation throughout the nation? But
yeah, I really wanted him to talk about his work and the things that he's doing and he's focusing on, because one of the things, Dave Ragland was from St. Louis, and he kind of started he didn't talk about the Truth Telling Project too much because he started that right after Ferguson. I went to Ferguson, Missouri also after that. I don't know if you know that, and I worked with the community college there for a couple of days, and his work has gotten a lot of attention. It may be because of Cori Bush. Cori Bush is the co-founder of the Truth Telling Project, and she was just elected to Congress. And one of the things that, Cori Bush had run for Senate, run for a couple of races, and, I can't answer any more than that, but reach out to him. Anybody else? Any other thoughts, observations from yesterday? There's some stuff in the chat. I think Lena put in about the book, so thank you.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead, Tulin.
About the Diplomacy Museum.
Mm-hmm.
Is it open to the public?
Yeah, but you have to make an appointment.
You have to
The last when things were open, it was only open on Fridays, and there isn't. I gotta tell you, there's not much in the Diplomacy Museum right now. There's kind of some standalone kind of exhibits, and you can read them and some stuff, but it's still in its beginning stages. But it's only Friday, and you have to go in advance. I took a group. Some of you may know I'm involved in the Fulbright Association. I'm the president of the DC chapter, and we had a program where we took about 20 Fulbrighters visiting Fulbrighters in DC based there last fall. They're not open now, but I think when they open back up, it'll be Fridays, and you can go to the website and then you could put in and make an arrangement. But we went there as a group last year. Remember, Tulin? I don't know if you were you last year?
Yeah, I came to the state.
We arranged for that. Yeah, and there's not much to see there right now. Work in progress. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? All right, so let's go ahead and and move on. And what I want to do is, so I just want to kind of repeat with you what's going on today. Looking at two screens at once, I apologize for that. Give you a sense of reminding you about what we're going to be doing today. We will have Tiara Moultrie, which I'm going to introduce in just a second. And then that will then take us to a break. And then we are going to, we'll have a conversation at the end. And really, it's really kind of up to you all. So let me give you a little bit of background of how I reached out to the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And then I'll introduce Tiara. And then Tiara, you're there, right?
I am here.
Okay, great. So let me do the first thing I need to do is I need to make you a let me see, make you a co-host. Okay. So yep. Tiara is the she is a policy associate at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and Tiara can tell us about what the Institute does. I don't actually think anybody in the room is directly from New Jersey, though we go in and out of New Jersey all the time, drive through New Jersey. But one of the things that I was interested in is that I was really interested in finding an organization, a local organization that was working on social justice issues. And one of the things that I also was interested in, because we've got so many things going on right now in this country. We have Black Lives Matter, and we've got police issues and defunding the police and everything. And one of the issues had to do with the impact of the pandemic. And one of the things that we had talked about was looking at the effect on Black and Brown communities in particular of the pandemic. The pandemic is going to be with us for a while. And I know parts of the country, maybe not so much the East, and I don't know if anybody here is from North and South Dakota and Nebraska and those places, really being hit really bad right now. And so we're all kind of struggling with what we're going to do for the holidays and so forth. But I think particularly Black and Brown communities, particularly since they're the frontline workers, right? So the incidences of they getting it is more serious, I think, in some respects. So anyhow, so Tiara, she has a BA in history from St. John's University. She was an active Robert McNair Fellow and a member of Phi Alpha Theta. She received her master's from Stony Brook University in 2014. So I'm so glad that you're here, Tiara, and I am just going to turn it over to you. We will go until about 1. You can take questions as you wish. Then we could maybe take 5 or 10 minutes of questions at that point. So it's really up to you, and whatever I can do on my end is let me know, because I'm gonna help facilitate it if you need that.
All right. That sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me this morning. I'm hopeful that everyone can hear me, so you can give me like a thumbs up to let me know that the sound quality is good, because I am someone who's always cold. So there is a heater right next to me since I happen to be in the office today. So you get to see sort of some lovely poster artwork that we're doing here at the Institute for Social Justice. If you'll give me a moment, I am going to attempt to share my screen.
Oh, it's coming up. There you go. I see it.
And as David mentioned, I am a policy associate at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I actually work specifically in the economic justice pillar. I'm going to talk a little bit about how our work is divided, but really we're an organization that's seeking to ensure that communities of color in New Jersey, especially urban communities, are able to really thrive in the state, and doing everything that we can to address that. I think New Jersey is a really interesting place to work, specifically because it is a northern state that in a lot of ways reads like a southern state. And I think people are always very surprised when we mention that, because there's a pretty strong idea that places like New York and New Jersey are more progressive and really don't have to deal with a lot of the same issues and struggles as the rest of the country. And we found that unfortunately that's not true. A lot of the work that we're doing is really working to undo this legacy of not only slavery in the United States, but also racialized discrimination sort of 20th century racialized discrimination in places like New Jersey. So that's why this theme, sort of from recovery to resilience and reconciliation, is really trying to understand the impact of COVID-19 and communities of color in the state. And more important than understanding what the impact of the current crisis is, really working to understand how did we get here and why is the impact on communities of color specifically sort of so profound during this moment. So the Institute's mission is to empower people of color by building reparative systems that create wealth, transform justice, and harness democratic power. That really is the framing for the work that we do. We're broken into 3 different bodies: economic justice, where I'm based, criminal justice reform, which is the home of our youth justice work, and a lot of our policing work as well. We actually sit on the Newark Police Department Consent Decree Task Force. For people who are unaware, Newark is under a consent decree and likely will be for a few more years. There are some attempts as a result of COVID-19 to decrease the length of that. In general, consent decrees last around 6 years, and essentially they're created because there's been a pattern of abuse as seen by the federal government in certain communities, and Newark is one of them. And then we also do the democratic power work through our democracy and justice initiatives, which I'll be able to talk about, which interestingly relate pretty closely to COVID-19, just because of issues around access and really being able to ensure that everyone who lives in New Jersey does have access to the ballot. We aim at toppling load-bearing walls of structural inequality and are, of course, committed to exposing and repairing cracks of structural racism. One of the things that we like to say about this crisis is that these earthquakes that we're seeing and this exposing of the foundations of our society is creating earthquakes in communities of color. And those earthquakes are really profound. I think one of the things that I've been hearing pretty consistently in a lot of these sort of COVID-19 panels is, you know, when America gets a cold, the Black community gets a flu, something that I think is more profound now than ever. So getting right into it, the coronavirus again has exposed pretty deep pre-existing cracks in America's foundation and in New Jersey's particularly. These cracks, we argue, are caused by design. So this is not something that is sort of a fluke that Black people are seeing higher incidents, not only of COVID-19 positive cases, but also far higher rates of death than in other communities. In New Jersey particularly, which does tend to be predominantly white, there are obviously very high incidents of white people contracting COVID-19. Around 53% of all confirmed COVID-19 cases are white, but their death rates are much, much lower than in the Black and brown communities in the state. So that's one of the things that we're currently exploring. I'm actually in the process of drafting a COVID-19 report. So it turned out to be a great time for me to join this because I've been doing a pretty deep dive in the data, which is one of the things I'll also talk about is just sort of trying to work through it because we haven't been in a situation before where we've been trying to address a crisis that is ongoing. In the initial sort of draft versions of this, we talked about a pre and a post-COVID period. And I think we're now realizing that we may never be in a post-COVID period. COVID-19 is something that's going to be our reality, at least for a number of years, whether we're talking about it in terms of the actual active virus or the economic implications of it. And I'll also try to keep an eye on the chat. I know I'm right now trying to look at 2 screens, but I will be mindful. Please, if you have questions, be sure to put them in the chat. These earthquakes mean that Black people and other communities of color have higher rates of underlying conditions on which the virus preys and are more likely to work in frontline jobs. I think the frontline jobs aspect is something that we've also been really passionate about just because people have been throwing around the term essential worker, which doesn't really exist in New Jersey specifically. Our Department of Labor has a very concrete definition for what an essential worker is, and most people who are currently coded as essential workers do not fit that guideline. So it is a criteria that's meant to refer to people who have to be on the road during periods of actual sort of global crisis, but it's intended in the language like pretty clearly is around like tornadoes, if there were an earthquake, if there were active flooding. There are people who are approved to have these cards that deem them essential workers who can be on the highway. Most of the people who are now grocery clerks, who are working in stock rooms, who are working in freight, wouldn't necessarily fit that bill, but now do. So we're also trying to understand what some of the legal implications around that will be, especially as we now are moving into a time where people think about what the benefits and survivors' benefits are going to be for a lot of people who are essential workers. And we talk about the crisis in a crisis. So in New Jersey, there have been over 270,000 cases, and as of today, 14,721 deaths. Our rates have been increasing in the last sort of 3 to 4 weeks, so we've seen a pretty big increase in the number of restrictions that New Jerseyans have been placed on. We're trying to work pretty diligently to ensure that data is available so that we can explore these gaps. So the Institute actually led the push to have them release information, demographic information specifically on COVID-19 cases. One of the interesting things about New Jersey compared to a place like New York is that each of our Department of Health functions pretty independently. So both the information that they put out really varies. So some counties have only put out information on the gender and age of people who have contracted COVID-19 and deaths, and other places have put out the racial information, which we were really more interested in. There is legislation passed that does mandate that the Department of Health release this information. Unfortunately, we also can't put timelines on when the information is released. So we are coming into some issues there. And then relatedly, the Department of Health has posed some concerns, both because they have never had to work this quickly. So in terms of getting out information, especially around race and ethnicity, which is going to be used to influence policy, there has been some pushback just around how quickly it's going to be accessible and available. The other unique thing about New Jersey is that people of color generally live in pretty densely populated urban centers. So New Jersey as a state is sort of broken into northern, central, and southern New Jersey. Northern New Jersey has, as you can imagine, a large number of people who work in New York City. And so there tend to be more affluent areas right along the border between New York and New Jersey. And then also within those communities, we have places like Newark. A little later in the presentation, there is going to be a Newark specific case study. Newark is where the Institute is based. It's also the largest city in New Jersey. And we'll talk a little bit about why it's also a unique location. Newark actually has the most restrictive COVID-19 rules right now because we have the highest incidence of death for the state and some of the highest rates of COVID-19 infection. There are a few alternate causalities for that. So just given that we work with ratios, obviously a lot of that has to do with population size, but there are also a number of issues that are specific to Newark as a location in terms of its high population of people of color and pretty historical inequalities that have existed. And then also the issue of health inequalities within the area. So New Jersey has the largest racial wealth gap in the country, and that's really the root of where all of these issues start. If you look at the median households within New Jersey, the average Black household has a median wealth of $6,100. It's $7,300 for Latino. Also, as a sort of overarching, you'll see me use Latino, and Hispanic interchangeably during this conversation. That's really based on the data sets that we're using. As an organization, we do tend to prefer Latino, but I will occasionally use Hispanic if I'm talking about census data or things that come directly from the Department of Health. And then the white wealth is 352,000. So again, that is the highest in the nation. A lot of that has to do with the fact that New Jersey has, in some areas, very, very good markets for housing. So people are able to accumulate a good deal of wealth in that way. And also we have a very high income compared to a lot of other places. The median income or the average income in New Jersey is just around 73 or 74,000. So it's a very interesting place, especially to do a lot of this deep dive work around racial wealth inequality, because I think that although it's become more into the public lexicon, previously people were really focused on income inequality as a way to understand how big the disparities and issues were. We've really chosen to focus on wealth because we think that the creation of generational wealth is what ultimately enables people to be able to generate money in a very real way. So I'll talk a little bit about student loans, which I think is going to be especially interesting given what the group that I'm talking to is, but also trying to understand things like how do people have access to employment? How are people able to live in a very meaningful way? So where they live, how they live, what access to healthcare they have is really all predicated on this issue around median wealth. And it also really deeply impacts other systems that the Institute works on, including democracy and justice, because in New Jersey, the franchise is in many ways connected to criminal justice. So with our democracy and justice work, we've been doing a great deal, specifically during this COVID-19 period. So working to keep elections safe was probably the most important thing. I won't get too into this since we're obviously still seeing some of the effects of what's happening. While there is no active suit in New Jersey, there are obviously several lawsuits just to determine a winner for the current election. But the Institute really worked hard to advance things like same-day voter registration, online voter registration, which was actually opened up about 4 weeks before the election, something that was really able to expand access. At the start of the crisis, one of the most pressing issues was that we were able to get voting rights restored in New Jersey for people on parole and probation. Unfortunately, in New Jersey, during the height of the pandemic, you could only register to vote by actually printing off and mailing in a voter registration form, something that a lot of returning citizens didn't have access to. Either they didn't have access to postal workers or didn't know like sort of when their mail would be picked up. And for the vast majority of them, they also just didn't have access to printers. So we tried to contact some individual organizations. So tried to work with the Department of Corrections, tried to work with a lot of parole officers and figure out if we mail you a number of these, would you be able to distribute them to people who are coming home, to a lot of returning citizens. And I think that that's something that we were able to pretty easily rectify with the advent of online voter registration. And then obviously expanding vote by mail and providing clear instructions for people. This became especially important because there was initially a lawsuit, and there were a few different ones actually around giving notice when mail-in ballots are rejected. So the Institute generally actually sort of 2 years ago didn't do any cases and pretty recently have really been going full steam ahead and representing clients or representing the state, representing individuals. So some of them came down for the election to things like signature match. So we actually represented a number of people who have disabilities who didn't have signatures that match whatever was on their ID card as a result of either mobility issues, handicaps, or just general physical ailments like arthritis, which really impacted their signatures, and were concerned about whether or not their votes would count. But also, there was an issue just around who would receive mail-in ballots. So we were really advocating to ensure that everyone who had access to the franchise would receive a mail-in ballot, and then also ensuring that those ballots were removed from police stations. So we weren't successful in all ways. We tried to contact individual counties just to point out that it can be very jarring, especially for people of color during this period of sort of heightened racial tensions and real tensions around policing, to have people have to drop off their ballots at police stations. This is especially interesting because, as mentioned, we just got voting rights restoration passed in New Jersey. So this was actually the first election for many of the citizens who were returning, as well as for people who were on parole and probation. So having a parolee have to go to a police station to cast their ballot can be a real deterrent. So we were advocating pretty heavily. And again, we got different responses. Sort of counties and municipalities in New Jersey have a great deal of power. While there are obviously some state ordinances, there are individual sort of rule issues that really affect how heavily we're able to advocate for some of these things. In our criminal justice reform, even pre-crisis, we were really advocating for community-based alternatives for youth justice. New Jersey has the worst youth and adult incarceration disparities. So a Black child in New Jersey is 21 times more likely to be locked up than a white child. As of, I believe, sort of 2 days ago, there were roughly 7 white children who were incarcerated, 23 Hispanic children, and then 89 Black children. So there really is a huge disparity, despite the fact that these kids commit most offenses at the same rate. I think one of the more jarring issues is also that if you look at some of the stats, many of these children generally come from communities of color, which are pretty far from a lot of our youth prisons. Most of the youth facilities in the state are in central and southern Jersey. The justification for that is that it allows for more therapeutic offerings. Since they're further away, they have more space, they're able to walk around the facilities. We've challenged that a little bit to say that really in terms of being able to bring people back into the community, it's more important that they're closer to home. There's also the very obvious barrier of, because children as young as 13 can be in these facilities, having them really far from their parents who tend to live in places like northern Jersey or southern Jersey and a lot of these metropolitan areas. They're not able to visit frequently. With the advent of COVID-19, they haven't been able to visit at all. So really thinking about what that's going to do in terms of that process of re-traumatizing youth. We know nationally that a number of children who are incarcerated have mental illnesses. So really that form of isolation that's now even more advanced as a result of COVID-19 is really concerning. And then the Black to white adult incarcerated population has a 12-to-1 ratio. So we're advocating for some real structural changes there. The Institute as a whole really believes in having no youth prisons. So we really advocate that children shouldn't be locked up at all for really extreme cases. There should be a focus on, one, having people sort of close to home and being able to be in alternative settings, even if they can't live at home, to really get the kind of services that they need to understand both why this happened, and then on the front end to really be concerned about what we can do to prevent children from ever becoming system involved. So New Jersey actually spends $300,000 a year per incarcerated youth, which is a vast difference from what we spend on education per youth, for example. So we're really trying to understand how we can take those funds that are currently being used inside of our youth prisons and really use them to come up with alternative programs, or to use them for things like community centers that are going to be basis for people within their community so that they don't have to become system involved. And then also just around the larger sort of system of care, right? Most youth who are incarcerated aren't incarcerated for like violent crimes. So while there are occasionally youth who are incarcerated for things like murder or like a violent sexual assault, it really tends to be things like theft, like assaults, drug charges. So really trying to understand, again, what are the community-based systems that we need in order to prevent children from needing to do these things or feeling like they need to do these things. And so within the policing realm, again, we do sit on the consent decree for the Newark Police Department. This consent decree is a result of a pattern of sort of racialized abuse. One of the interesting things about Newark specifically is that there was a rebellion in the 1960s in Newark following a officer involved shooting of a civilian, which really impacted how Newark became what it ultimately became. It was really marred by blight and a lot of white flight initially during that period right after the rebellion, because people came to see it as an unsafe location. So we really tried to think heavily about what we could do to deal with that. So a consent decree officially means that the Department of Justice has seen a pattern of abuses, so they have to come up with a consent decree. It outlines all the things that a community has to do in order to address the various issues that they've seen. So within Newark, some of those issues were again around obviously like just sort of racialized discrimination, LGBTQ policies, how to deal with people who don't speak English. Newark has a really, really large immigrant population. It does tend to be sort of Latino, but we also have a large Brazilian and Portuguese population. It's like the third largest outside of Brazil and Portugal. So really a lot of those issues had to be defined within the consent decree. The Institute's role is to serve as the sort of community liaison. So we organize a lot of events. Each quarter of the consent decree, they have to put out a quarterly report that addresses what they've been doing to sort of ease these concerns or at least address them. So a lot of it has to do with retraining officers, has to do with, again, trying to get more community voices. So every year we do an annual survey that tries to address things like, have you had contact with the police? If you have had contact with the police, how would you define it? How do you think police interact with different populations? So again, a lot of those big ones in Newark specifically were like the Black population, the Latino population, non-English speaking population, LGBTQ population, and then the homeless population. We have a very, very large transient population in Newark as well. Some of that has to do with some local issues. So because of a lot of our zoning, most of our shelters are really only for adult women. So we have a very large population of transient men. So really trying to understand, how do we interact with those populations? How do we deal with those populations? In a lot of ways, Newark is very similar. For the person from Nassau County on the call, if you were to go through like New York Penn Station, you see a large number of homeless people sleeping in the station, really living in the bathrooms. The same thing happens in Newark. So really trying to think about what we can do to address these concerns. And theoretically, you come out of the consent decree once we're able to prove that the pattern has been solved or broken. But most consent decrees do tend to last, again, about 6 or 7 years. I think it takes that long really to see whether or not there's been formal training that's actually addressed these issues. And so for community-based alternatives to youth prison, for us, it's really a focus on, one, trying to think about what individual communities need. Again, we do focus on urban communities in New Jersey, so that does skew things a little bit. We don't focus as heavily on sort of rural organizations or rural cities within the state. So for us, it's really been a focus on things like what after-school programming is available, what programming is offered for children on weekends, what are we doing for families in terms of family services? So again, those issues around theft, what are we doing for families that are facing issues of food insecurity, and really trying to understand what some of those larger things look like. The community-based alternatives would really focus on that, and also thinking about how to repurpose some of these structures. So the youth prisons are very large. Based on the numbers I gave earlier, while New Jersey does have this really huge disparity in terms of the Black to white youth incarceration, it's actually a small number of people. So over time, New Jersey has really decreased its youth prison population. So they're in these massive structures paying a lot of staff for really a pretty small number of children to look after per facility. So we think about, what could you turn that into? Could we essentially invest funding into these areas and turn a lot of these former youth prisons into places like schools? One of the youth prisons in New Jersey actually was a sort of Black school in the 1920s and 1930s. So really trying to think about, how do we get away from that? How do we move this from a boarding school for Black New Jerseyans to a place where we now hold Black youth? So we are working on that. And thank you, David.
Was my clear what I put in the chat box? Consent decrees, I said it came up, not what I wanted to, but consent decrees are usually used frequently in the federal court system with regard to voting rights and busing in the 1960s. So you've got these jurisdictions that were basically, the jurisdiction would have to report to the federal district court about how they were doing, right? And so you see them at all levels, but we've heard them mostly at the federal level, right, Tiara? You know,
Yes.
probably all this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in Newark, really, again, trying to work pretty hard just to be able to address some of these issues and bring community members together. I think even some of the basic things that we did originally were things like a lot of the policing meetings were held during the day. So they'd be like a Wednesday at noon. And so it was like, well, what members of the community are going to be available to attend these meetings during this time? You're not going to have any youth, for example, because they're all theoretically in school during that time. You're not going to have a good number of adults who are working during that time. So even basic things like moving meetings to like Thursdays at 6 really were able to have an impact on just like what people knew about what was happening in their community. A good number of people just didn't know about program that police were offering. And then I think one of the surprising things that we were finding with the surveys as well was that people wanted to see more police officers. I think that we hadn't anticipated that, but the vast majority of people said, I'd like to see more like beat cops essentially, or I'd like to see more police activities within schools. Like I used to be able to see an Explorer program at my school and they stopped that. And that's something I'd like to see return. So we really had originally, I guess, anticipated that most people would say like, I want less policing, I want less people in the community. And it's really the opposite in Newark. Related to the COVID-19 crisis, specifically, New Jersey actually has the highest rate of COVID-19 deaths among its incarcerated population. Incarcerated people here aren't able to quarantine or really practice social distancing in a meaningful way because they are also at high risk. There have been some studies that look at what the effects of that are on mental health. So generally, people who are at higher risk for contracting COVID-19 have higher levels of anxiety and stress, something that's obviously compounded by people already being currently incarcerated. On November 4th, 2,200 incarcerated people were released from New Jersey prisons as a result of the public health emergency credit legislation that was recently passed. This actually allowed for people who were within 1 year of their release to be sort of fast track towards release as long as they weren't convicted of certain violent offenses. This is, I think, one of the more interesting legislations because it happened sort of all at once. It was the largest single day release of formerly incarcerated people. And that 2,200 number is actually going to increase hopefully to around 3,000. Since the crisis started, New Jersey has decreased its prison population roughly 35%. So they are making some pretty significant strides. There has been pushback, so I don't want to make it seem like everyone has been supportive of these pieces of legislation. For example, in Trenton, which is the state's capital, there was a pretty big pushback because they were concerned about returning citizens who may, as a result of things like not being able to find jobs, as a result of just like trying to deal with the pandemic, being forced back into isolation if we go back into quarantine right after being incarcerated, may turn to violence, and some concerns that there had been sort of higher incidents of violent crime in those areas. A lot of our work, again, is in Newark. We haven't seen a lot of those same things, but I think that this is a pretty consistent shift for New Jersey more broadly. They are really making moves towards a decreased prison population. And so we think that with the public health emergency credits legislation, it was a way to acknowledge that we do have the highest rate of death among its incarcerated population. We actually had a rally with Salvation and Social Justice, another organization run by a pastor here in New Jersey, sort of a say your name rally, because during the height of the pandemic, the governor was also posting on sort of Instagram daily. There were these people who had passed away as a result of COVID-19. And so for a lot of the families of people who were incarcerated, they said, well, you know, my son passed away and there was not the same level of recognition. There wasn't the same level of concern. And more importantly, like, I haven't been able to see him. I wasn't able to get a body. I didn't know that he was sick. No one in the prison told me for a long time. So really, it was the result of advocacy that really led to this pretty important legislation. And I think that while obviously there are these carve outs, so it doesn't refer to people who have committed certain violent offenses, but because it would allow people who would have been released and really have served the majority of their sentence anyway, I think that it makes a pretty big dent in not only our prison population, but also helping us rethink how we do reentry. That was one of the big concerns, was actually that because of this massive release, there were some concerns from community-based organizations that they just didn't have the resources, partially because they're working remotely right now, to be able to really cater to the needs of all of the returning citizens. So that's an issue that we're going to be watching pretty closely. And now for the sort of more focused portion, Essex County, where the Institute is based and where Newark is based, is New Jersey's third most populous county. We have 29,194 COVID-19 positive cases, and a little over 1,900 COVID-19 mortalities is actually the highest in the state. 15% of the state's incarcerated population is from Essex County, with Newark and places like West and East Orange, which are also majority minority communities, contributing the most people to the New Jersey prison system. And 1/4 of districts labeled 100% intensely segregated are in Essex County. So the West Orange School District is 31% Black, 38% Black, 31% Hispanic, 38% Black, and sort of the neighboring community, Essex Falls, which is a lot smaller, is 5% Hispanic and 3% Black. Millburn, which is on the other side of the border, also has really, really low percentages of minorities within the community. Newark is the inverse, so it's 48% Hispanic, 42% Black. It should be 48% Black, 42% Hispanic. Glen Ridge, which is 10 miles away, is 6% Hispanic and 4% Black. So we have really intense hypersegregation here within our school systems. The effects of that within the pandemic are pretty obvious, just in terms of who has access to things that they're going to need. So within New Jersey, there were lots of concerns just about the digital divide and what impact that would have. Newark public schools have been doing a really great job. I believe the last report was that 96% of students in school now had access to laptops or tablets. There were some larger concerns, and so there have been some community members that are really pushing to do things like try to ensure that people have access to MiFis so that they also have access to internet during this time. So Newark also reports among the lowest number of residents that have access to broadband internet subscriptions in the state. Generally, the number's pretty high, around I think the average is 80% of people in New Jersey have access to internet, but really those issues around who has monthly internet subscriptions have been pretty big, especially in our urban communities. And then in Newark, where we are based and where I'm coming to you from, it is New Jersey's largest city, which is actually surprising since I'm from New York. There are only 280,000 people in Newark. It is a minority majority city, so it's 48% Black, 36% Latino. As a side, the data for Newark does get a little complicated between the Latina and white populations, just because we have that really large and robust Portuguese population. So you'll see that number in pretty different ways. So sometimes it's reported as high as 47 because the white alone population is 11%, but arguably much smaller, depending on if you define people as being European or sort of largely Hispanic or part of the Spanish diaspora, and 2% Asian. 18% of Newark residents are employed in the city, with most relegated to low-paying jobs. That number is actually really surprising given the size of Newark. Other cities of similar size, so like a Cincinnati and New Orleans, really have much higher rates of people who live in the city also being employed in the city. One of the big concerns with that is obviously with the height of COVID-19, people taking mass transit either into New York in order to work or having to drive pretty far into southern New Jersey in order to find employment has been the big concern. Newark was going through a period of resurgence. So for people who were unaware, Newark used to have, and in some ways still does, a very negative reputation. So it's been trying to move away from its brick city reputation of a lot of blight, these concerns about what happened post-rebellion, a lot of industry left. We had pretty massive white flight in Newark. But I think with the current administration, there's been a real push to focus on economic development as a way of revitalizing the city. So there are a number of organizations that are now headquartered here, places like Audible, PSE&G, Mars Wrigley, Panasonic, which are all anchor institutions that have also joined on to an initiative that we are working on called Newark 2020, which is intended to decrease the unemployment gap between the city and the state by connecting 2020 residents to employment with local organizations, either directly or indirectly through vendors before December 31st. So they are working actively to sort of think through this, but I think we've also, in some ways, had to guide and advise people of the need to hire locally, to be a good neighbor, not just through things like donations. So Audible is also very generous in terms of giving people tablets, giving out sort of annual subscriptions to schools, but really what it means to meaningfully invest in community is not just to do things like a day of service at a school, but really to also ensure that those kids have parents who can work in the city and have access to employment. So we've really been working on that. And then if you'll remember the sort of Essex slide, the number of positive cases and mortalities in Newark is really where a lot of that number comes from. So roughly 40%, around 38% of the total COVID-19 mortalities in Essex County are from Newark. We have had one of the highest rates and continue to have one of the highest rates of COVID-19 mortalities, which has led to some concerns just around restrictions. So I think I mentioned previously, Newark had pretty excessive restrictions compared to other places. So Newark was the first to implement a mask and glove mandate. So you actually couldn't go to any stores. They had Be Still Monday, which asks for businesses to close every Monday to ensure that people were staying home totally at least one day a week. And then also a lot of restrictions and really increased ticketing early on in the pandemic for people not wearing masks, not wearing gloves, and then also some concerns around gatherings. So we are still doing some exploratory data to try to understand people's general feelings about that. We actually have a survey that's going to come out next week and will be open for around a month to really try to understand people's responses to some of those issues around policing. And to get a better sense about the effect that people think it has had in Newark. So has it been a positive having this sort of increased police presence? We also had, and I can't speak for other cities, obviously I'm living in Newark currently. So like police officers and police cars would really sort of blare pretty round the clock announcements telling people to go back inside, to keep 6 feet, to stay safe. But I think in some ways there was also sort of overarching government intervention with things like people who lived in public housing really had far more restrictive rules on them than people who lived in other places. So I only live about a mile from the nearest public housing development. They actually were on almost 24-hour lockdown and could only leave to get groceries or to go on doctor's appointments. And I didn't have those same restrictions. So really trying to understand also what those things mean, like sort of people who live in city housing to have these excessive restrictions, sort of what does that do to them mentally, but also what does it do to their belief in the state and whether or not they're doing things for their benefit and for their good. Part of the issue with the racial wealth gap and also part of the issue with, I think, New Jersey in general is, again, the sort of hyper-segregation and really what that comes down to. There are very, very low rates of Black home ownership in New Jersey. The rates are around 77% white home ownership and around 41% for Black New Jerseyans. In Newark especially, there's a really, really high rate of renters. So obviously only 23% of people live in owner-occupied homes. 63.3% of Newark renters of color are cost burden. Communities of color have been facing really vast issues around the Great Recession from loss of home ownership and the wealth disparity. So that, again, really intense racial wealth gap with only 6,100 around the average sort of Black household's wealth and 352,000 for a white household really comes down to issues around not just home ownership, but also home value. So I'm looking at a place like Essex County, which has white communities as well as really large communities of color. The value in homes is drastically different and really accounts again for a lot of that white flight that we saw from Newark, that even in places like sort of Weequahic, which now is home to a lot of those former McMansions that people lived in, the home values are incredibly low compared to places that are just 6 or 7 miles away. And renters are particularly vulnerable during the pandemic. While the city has really stepped up to try to address this, a lot of the rules, as I think is true sort of nationally, have really been for the most low-income residents. So there are some concerns that people who are just low income as opposed to very low income, as well as people who are just below middle income, are really being excluded from a lot of the programs because the ones that are sponsored by the city government are really based on area median income. So it's much, much lower than the states in terms of the threshold that would allow you to qualify for grant programs. So we're trying to understand what some of these impacts are and then also the areas that they're in, because one of the areas that's seeing this the most is actually the Ironbound, which is actually, as of like yesterday, as of Thursday, is under the most severe restrictions in the state. So people both cannot leave their home and are concerned about whether or not they'll be able to stay in their home as a result of their rental status. The other issue in Ironbound is because it has this large Portuguese population. One of the real issues is that in Newark, essentially the city of Newark can only protect you if you are in housing that is known by the city of Newark. So if you are undocumented and living in a basement, for example, you don't have access to any of the protections that you otherwise would have. And obviously, most of the time your landlord also knows that you are undocumented. And therefore, if you try to say things like, but I thought there was a moratorium, I thought I couldn't be evicted, they do remind you that that only refers to people who are living in legal apartments. And how did we get here? So this is obviously a redlined map of Essex County. The areas in red actually are Newark. So it's sort of Newark and the Ironbound, and then the surrounding communities are sort of east and west orange, and then sort of the further out you go, the places that are more hospitable that an HOLC would say we're good to live in, are really also the areas where there are predominantly white households now, and there really aren't seeing as huge an impact in terms of COVID-19 rates. So a place like Millburn, for example, has only reported 5 deaths compared to 695 in Newark. So unequal access to homeownership has really been the driving factor. So those racially restrictive covenants, things like redlining, have really been the biggest issue. Inequality in the GI Bill. So obviously for returning veterans, there were very real concerns around there were very big concerns around who would have access to certain benefits, where people would be able to live, and whether or not they'd be able to take advantage, has been the biggest concerns. And then with redlining, obviously, it was to deem communities, or to identify communities that were less desirable. Unfortunately, these red line maps have been coming back into the sort of public conversation as a result of the current crisis. So NCRC recently has been doing some data comparing red line maps to COVID-19 rates currently. And for Newark, and they actually did an Essex County wide, which has been one of the issues with the data in New Jersey, which is why I had sort of an Essex and a Newark. There isn't sort of hyper local information around cities, but Essex County's map actually lines up pretty well with current rates of COVID-19 infection, which I think is, the biggest concern. And then obviously the Great Recession, which we're still bouncing back from, which is going to have a pretty profound impact on how New Jersey is able to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, really led to a lot of issues around predatory lending. And so in terms of people who lost their homes during the Great Recession, the vast majority in New Jersey were Black homeowners. And so in terms of redlining and that impact on home value, a lot of these disparities are, again, by design as a result of what we think certain populations are. So if you look at a Black versus a white population, the home ownership rates and the home values are substantially different for these areas. And are really going to make a profound impact on just who has access to what. There are pretty massive health disparities. So in New Jersey, there are 690,000 people who are uninsured, which is a pretty big increase. It's something that we've been seeing nationally sort of since 2016. And 49.5% of the state's non-elderly uninsured are Hispanic, which in many ways has a lot to do with the fact that people are undocumented. So they are unwilling to do things like go to hospitals, which is also having a pretty profound impact in places like Newark, where we are seeing really high death rates. And a lot of studies have said that's a direct result because people are coming to the hospital too late in their sort of disease condition. So most people are coming when they already have difficulty breathing. And given the high rates of things like COPD and asthma in Newark compared to the rest of the county and the state, it's pretty compelling information. Very, very quickly, our student loan crisis and white communities in New Jersey, the crisis isn't hitting people as heavily. While we do acknowledge that there is federal interventions that are currently available, those federal forbearances do expire fairly soon. And also, if you are like me and are a sort of low-income student who attended college in the early 2000s and have a Perkins loan, despite the fact that they are technically federal because they are not held by the Department of Education, you are still in active repayment. 8.5% of New Jersey borrowers are currently behind or in default. And then some of our advocacy, we're currently advocating for a ban on chokeholds, something that I'm sure you've already heard a pretty large amount during the session, and also help to center community voices on police reform. So really thinking about how do we do appointments for things like task force and really ensuring that local people are able to be on those task forces, and then how do we redirect tax dollars away from policing to community-based alternatives. And then moving forward, we're also advocating for a new lockbox fund. So again, when we think about what it means to recover, really addressing these long-standing issues that existed before the crisis and thinking about how we can address them. We have legislation for a reparations task force in New Jersey that hasn't advanced. It's been stalled for almost a year and was recently reintroduced. So we're still advocating for that. A guaranteed income program, something that Newark and Patterson, which is our neighbor to the north, are looking at in order to expand access. And then one of the recommendations from our student loan report was the establishment of a baby bond program. So we have been working with legislators in the state to come up with what a more progressive baby bond program could look like that's more in line with with Senator Booker's introduction. And that is it for me.
I was going to say that the baby bond, I know Senator Booker has talked a lot
Yes.
about that, about the importance of every child who, once they are born, being able to create that nest egg.
Yes.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it's really about wealth accumulation, I guess maybe is
Yes.
the word you put it, is that really makes the difference. That if you can do that so early on, communities of color often never can engage in that
Mhm.
because they're always behind in so many other ways. And then when you have, they're already vulnerable. So when you have something like this, it's the breaks the camel's back, or whatever the expression is for a lot of people. So questions. Thank you, Tiara. Questions.
Of course.
It's interesting. It's about New Jersey, but I think I can extrapolate it across the country in many respects and looking at your own communities. So anyone have a question or any observations
Any
about some of the things? So just open your mic. Lena, your mic is open.
Oh, Ms. Moultrie, I was going to ask you, is there any data about they're saying that the rate of suicide has gone up in young people. Are you seeing that more in the minority communities as well?
So there is national data to support that, but nothing local. That's been, again, the biggest issue with this. And then we were also trying to find some information around specifically youth who are incarcerated, who already have high rates of mental illness, but there are no studies done in the US, only in the UK, though those are also showing the same trend.
Tulin, you had a question? Go ahead, Tulin.
Yes, you talked about the lack of insurance among people of color. So I was wondering, was the ACA not accessible to them?
So that historic low in 2016 for insurance was supposed to be as a result of the ACA. And then the subsequent years that we've seen sort of higher rates of people being uninsured has to do with a lot of issues around the rollbacks and attempts to repeal it. But there were initially much higher rates, sort of 2015 and 16, and then they subsequently went back up, unfortunately. New Jersey's rate has always actually been around that level since around 2000, or since 2010. That's really when we also saw the shift that saw our population change pretty drastically. So once I think the Latino population reached like 20% in the state, we did start to see a lot of those same racial disparities. And I think it still goes back to that issue of just like large undocumented segments of the Latino population.
Yeah, it strikes me how much is hinged on being undocumented, not going to the hospital, not getting benefits, being thrown out by your landlord. All these different things hinge on the fact that you are not documented, right?
Yeah, a lot of our CDCs, our community development corporations, are also working on that issue just because of the realization that they also weren't able to get a stimulus package. If you were undocumented or worked off the books, you didn't have access to that $1,200. So there have been some local organizations that have partnered with different banks to be able to give people essentially debit cards with $1,200 on them. But for many of those people, that those funds have already been spent, and they really aren't going to see access to anything close to it because they aren't going to be able to qualify for unemployment insurance.
That's why immigration path to citizenship reform is so important, but I don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon. I'm hopeful, but other questions, just open your mic, please, or observations.
So try to exit this.
Yeah, go ahead. Anyone else? Thinking about where you are, whether you're seeing the same situations where you are. We got people. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciated, Tiara, all that factual information. I did grow up in New Jersey, but I don't get there as often as I used to. I had put in the chat, something going on in the city right now in Manhattan is this brouhaha over homeless being moved into hundreds into Upper West Side hotels. And a very favorable outcome of that was that in October, the folks won the lawsuit. The folks the 200 men that are in the Lucerne can stay there. And it's just an amazing community victory because, they were not moved out of the hotel on account of being on the Upper West Side. Anyway, my question really related to that is, in your work, do you find that hotels have been helpful in any way, or is there any kind of redistribution of folks that are in shelters, traditional shelters that have higher risk of COVID for that reason? Is there any kind of sort of analogous shift that might happen in New Jersey along those lines to help people, like small group by small group, become more rehabilitated, not only free from sort of the COVID dangers, but the men at the Lucerne have experienced for the first time, they've said, an appreciation of being kind of mainstreamed and integrated into the community and affirmed by the community. And that's like an amazing thing on the very wealthy Upper West Side.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering if you've seen anything, any kind of similar strides in New Jersey or in Newark.
So in Newark, we have made some of those strides. Again, we had a big issue sort of pre-crisis that I'm hopeful doesn't return, but because of a lot of our zoning, many of the shelters here don't allow men at all and don't allow families, which has been a big issue. We actually found that out as we were doing sort of unrelated data on school truancy, and found that a large part of the reason for a lot of the truancy is that children are living separate from their mothers who are living in shelters, and then they're living with grandparents who may or may not be responsible for getting them ready for school and getting them to school. One of the things that Newark has done that's been really good is there are, as a result of this recent sort of revitalization or, renaissance, whatever you decide to call it, there are a large number of hotels now in downtown Newark as opposed to just around the airport. And many of those have actually been converted into housing for the homeless population. And so there are, I believe, 4 hotels, and 2 are for COVID-19 positive and 2 are for people who haven't tested positive. Though we will have to watch and see if that continues to be the case. And also once we start doing things like having more active meetings as a resident of downtown Newark, just hoping that other people who live down here also don't do what they did when I was living in the Bronx, sort of at the time of gentrification there, when suddenly people were saying, you can't have all of these homeless shelters here, and what about the kids? And there's already an opioid clinic here. We can't have people like that around here. And being meetings like, we live by Yankee Stadium. What do you mean around here? This is the Bronx. But hopefully we won't see the same thing down here, since it is sort of the downtown Newark area. That's where these hotels are concentrated. And it's also generally where people who tend to be more affluent live.
Thank you. That's really inspiring. Thank you.
Other questions? Just open your mic.
And I'll keep trying to drop things in the chat.
Yeah. Anything going on? I mean, the question that I think about is, how do we respond to this, right? As an education community, right? The Black and brown populations are being affected more significantly because of COVID. Is there a role that we play in raising awareness? Are there spaces that we can create on our own campuses? I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
So I can say I certainly hope that there are. One of the things that I think has been oddly great about the crisis is that generally we haven't been able to do as many talks before because we have a really small staff. So our team is only 18 people. But now I've been able to talk to students at basically every college in New Jersey recently about a lot of these things. And so I think that that's been the biggest shift, is talking to groups and having them realize that these are issues that are occurring. I think that we've also been pretty strongly advocating for things like in the original legislation that came out that sort of stopped providers from cutting off internet access. It was for people who had children in K-12 classrooms. So for people who were college students who were living in households that didn't have internet subscriptions or were behind, they could still be turned off. So luckily that was eventually expanded to also include sort of anyone over 18, as long as they were enrolled in school. They wouldn't turn off the internet even if they were behind in payments. But that's one of the things that we've also been trying to watch and be mindful of, is really ensuring that that digital divide can exist at all educational levels. And while a lot of the advocacy has really been focused on K-12 education, also ensuring that students who unfortunately can't be on campus now, even if they were dealing with issues of like housing insecurity, have access to the internet and are able to continue to keep up with their schoolwork while away from campus.
How are you, and it's a tough question to ask, and is this, how are you thinking about the winter coming up? I mean, the metropolitan New York area can have a tough winter, right? And particularly when I think about undocumented people living in kind of, they're very vulnerable. Yeah, it could be a couple tough couple of months coming up, right?
We are anticipating a tough couple of months. So Newark, again, is going to have likely different restrictions than what the governor actually enacts, as it has throughout every stage of this crisis. And I think for us, there is real concern that there's going to be related issues. So as part of our survey, we're also asking more targeted housing questions, just because we are concerned about the possibility that people will be evicted because of fears that they could eventually contract COVID-19. And that's going to refer in the Ironbound section, which is where the sort of large Portuguese and Brazilian population lives. The concern is going to be because that's also the sort of downtown area. It's where all of the restaurants are. So there's going to be concerns from landlords that this person who's now been working in restaurants for the last 6 months and is now home is going to potentially expose other residents. And then that will lead to evictions, which is our biggest concern. Is just that people are going to be evicted. And then there were some early concerns. We actually had some preliminary conversations around that, and they were sending around sort of flyers to different organizations, just around also concerns around sexual harassment. So people who can't pay their rent receiving unwanted advances from their landlords, and then some related concerns just around for people who couldn't pay and had children, like what would happen to their children. So it's a crisis within a crisis. There are all of these issues that we're really trying to think about what advocacy we can do that's going to be sort of broad in its scope, and really try to get to the root of some of these issues for people who don't have these legal protections. And unfortunately, that's the population that it's really hardest to reach a lot of the times whether we're drafting sort of legislation ourselves or working with someone on legislation, there are usually these sort of give and take moments. So like we were pushing for full restoration, we got only people on parole and probation. So now we go back and do the fight for people who are currently incarcerated. I think the concerns around undocumented people will be, I do think that the language is probably going to be pretty specific in saying like it has to be housing registered with the state or the city.
Right.
And so that's the obvious and biggest legal loophole, is just saying like for people who have and live in apartments that aren't registered, which is pretty common in New Jersey. For people who haven't been here, it's really a lot of multifamily homes. So you don't see like large high rises. There aren't huge apartment buildings here, at least not in Newark. And so really a lot of people who are living in these basement apartments are going to have real concerns during the winter. And we've already started to see, and there are some studies that are showing like just high rates of white flight as a result of COVID-19, and then some increased concern just around what it's going to mean for housing markets in Newark, because our housing market is already not great. And so we're imagining that with the number of New Yorkers who are going to be priced out of the city, or just want to leave and live in slightly more like suburban communities as a result of like living in a largely populated community during the pandemic, made me realize I want to have a backyard again, will really be a large number of people coming in to also buy property, and possibly just sit on it for a number of years, which has been probably one of the biggest issues in Newark, as well as people sort of buying up property but never actually intending to live here.
Yeah.
So
Other questions, maybe another question or two. Go ahead, Susan, again.
I guess I was just going to ask, are you getting good support from Phil Murphy? Are you supported by the government on the work you're doing?
So we actually do not take any government funding, which is intentional on our part. We want to be able to advocate for things that we think are important, which usually is in line, but isn't always. Even I think the other issue is like, even when we have people who we agree with on certain issues, we don't want to be bound because we may not, our ideas may converge in other places. So like we have people who support like our apprenticeship work because it's around jobs and tax credits, who don't also support a reparations task force. So we also don't want to be in a situation where we have these like, I guess, alliances with people who may not necessarily be great bedfellows in general. Yeah, so it's based on individual donations, which I think, speaking frankly, has been one of the things that has been good about this crisis. I think that a lot of organizations that do racial justice work have been getting an increase in donations, and really an increase in just being invited or asked to speak on issues has been really great. I think that it's important, and I think that one of the things that I think has been interesting for us is like, so every like Black History Month, we're all booked all 18 of us are speaking somewhere like during that 1 month a year. And I think it's been great that now we've really seen that expanded. It's not just like, oh, we have this month of like programming around Black issues and we'd like to invite you to speak. It's now like we're understanding that these issues are pervasive and really affect every aspect of life. So we understand now that the work that you do around employment has far-reaching consequences. We now understand that like these issues around why the franchise is connected to criminal justice, sort of relatedly, we didn't get to it, like 62% of people who are still disenfranchised in New Jersey are Black, even though we're only 15% of the total population. So when we did sort of voting rights restoration for people on parole and probation, you also have to think about the racialized dynamics around that. Who's more likely to get parole and probation? People can afford attorneys. And so really that's part of why there's this huge disparity still with mostly Black people being still incarcerated and still separated from the vote, or separated from the vote.
All right, well, thank you, Tiara. A round of applause. Really appreciate it. It's insight into what's going on in New Jersey and for us to think about it in context of where we are. Thank you. I'll be in touch this week, but really appreciate your time. I think it was really well done and really, once again, thinking about how it's just not COVID, these other things that you're doing also, lots of ways in which, people of color are being impacted. So we're going to take a 5-minute, probably not even 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, take a break, get up, walk around, come back, last 45 minutes. Then we're going to spend kind of talking about the last 6 sessions, thinking about things going forward, what you want to do. I've got some ideas I want to put out there. So I'm going to turn off my screen for 3 minutes, then I'll come back, at 1:16 or so. So, okay. Thanks again, Tiara.
No problem, bye. And please feel free to write if you have any questions, if you're concerned about
put your contact information in the chat. That'd be great.
Put it in, yeah. But if you're concerned about how to also push for things like our reparations task force, we really are hoping that other people will join and do similar things in their own state. There has been now, I think it's a good time to strike now.
Yeah, I think
so. If there are things that you're thinking about advocating for, or trying to figure out how you can push for on your campus community that are related to racial justice, we're happy to help people think through that.
Great, thanks. Behind it, if you're curious, anybody know what that is behind it? Those of you who are geographers? That's Victoria Falls. Doesn't look like that because I think they've been having a bit of a drought over there. Lena and I were there, I guess 3 years ago, visiting our son who was in the Peace Corps. He wasn't there, he was in Namibia. But anyhow, so I put together this word cloud, I guess that's the word, just to kind of, so this is really based on, and I also have a list, so I'll really go to the list rather than the word cloud, because the word cloud is just a way of kind of thinking about it in a way. In the survey that I asked you to complete, the first or second question was, what are the objectives that you want? I asked people to come up with 3 objectives that they wanted to reach in the seminar, and I found a lot of networking, gaining knowledge, strategies, right? And some of those things we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on. So now is really the time to think about it. Learning new things, meeting other colleagues, what is peace building, talking about that. And we can talk about that a little bit too. I can show you a couple of things if you'd like to kind of get you thinking about those things. But so that's just the words that come up from it. What I actually did, though, that is probably more useful, but is more a little bit more time consuming in a sense, is that, let's share my screen again, is you should be able to see a list. Does everyone see the list of words? People see that? Tell me if you do.
Yes.
Objectives? Okay, so what I did is I kind of just went through the survey that you'd provided, and I just kind of cut and paste all the words, or all of what you said, and then I kind of pulled out I pulled out like in what you say, kind of a word that would talk about it. So, you know, things like career options. We actually talked about that at the beginning, deep my understanding, peace building goals, peace building issues, advocacy for social justice. And we can just go through some of these. That's an alternative. But maybe what I'd rather do is really talk to you all and get a sense of what is it that you would rather we think about right now, rather than necessarily going through a list of words, right? Of things that you think are kind of relevant for us to think about, to look at, to talk about, things that we haven't covered, things that maybe you want to share about what's going on in your own colleges. So I'm really kind of open to most any way of looking at it. I'm going to move this. You're probably not going to see it now because I've moved it only just to make it easier for myself. Give me a second here. And you know what? I won't share it right now. I'll come back to that. Let's just kind of talk a bit. So people, what are you thinking? Maybe we could start off by talking about Tiara's presentation, observations about that. I know nobody here is actually teaching in New Jersey per se, but what does that reflect in what you're thinking about? How do you take that back to your community? How do you take that back to your school? Some of those understandings. So, thoughts, ideas.
So I'll say
Sheila.
that there was a lot of parallels. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
I'm at a park right now. So I thought that there was a lot of parallels. I'm in LA, and there's, I think we have when they were talking about the undocumented, that hits really strong out here. And so there was a lot of resources that I was jotting down to get some demographics, some notes for some of the projects that we work on, because we do a homeless project. And I'm going to send you guys the Santa Monica Film Department, the students put together a really good project that's going on about the conversion of some of the hotels out here for the COVID and the homeless at the same time. So they are doing some things here, and I've been researching it to do a project for the architecture department on, converting buildings into homeless. So I was really happy. There was some great information there and some really good information to think about and distill for our area.
And if you put that in the chat, Sheila, that's great. The other way is just sending it to me, and I'll make sure that I email it out to everyone. Yeah.
Because I don't have the movie link right here. It is a YouTube one that I can send you, but I will send it to you later
I'll
today.
send it to all the students in the
Perfect. Thanks.
Anybody else? Any thoughts about the presentation? Just open your microphone. Share with us.
I'll just say I'm thrilled to learn that such an institute for social justice exists in New Jersey. I mean, when I was growing up in Jersey 30 something years ago, I honestly, there was no such thing. So just from the standpoint of knowing that it exists and that the kind of networking that Tiara's organization is doing is really important. And this is just a practical matter, but I just texted her asking her if one of my students could reach out to her, because I do in my Intro to Peace Studies course at the end, and this is largely inspired from David's book. If any of you, I'm sure most of you know it, Peace Jobs. I do a practical component at the end of the class where students contact an organization doing peace, justice, or conflict resolution and interview somebody there, whether it's in the education wing, or perhaps I asked if Tiara would be open to an interview by my students. And then this is how we multiply and spread the word of such a great institute, right? They'll come back and present it to the class. And so I'm waiting to hear back, and I hope so it's just from a practical standpoint, I think her organization is awesome.
And that's a really good point, Susan. I would ask you all to think about, there must be your town, your city institute or something for human rights. I mean, I know in my city, I live in the city of Rockville, we have a Human Rights Commission that is appointed by the mayor. I actually was chair of it for a number of years. And we do a number of different things. I mean, a lot of it has to do with education. We're not doing much right now, but we have a Human Rights Commission. And there was a time when, for a couple of years, I would have interns from Montgomery College on the Human Rights Commission. We did this for about 3 years when I was chair, and then I don't think the next chair necessarily did it. But So that was an opportunity for students to actually work in local human rights issues. And in our city, I mean, we're a fairly diverse city. There's no group that's a majority, but, you know, we were looking at the time, particularly LGBTQ issues and so forth. And so we had some projects that we had students working on and so forth, but community college internship, you know, worked really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll do that. Anybody else? Anyone, just open your mic. Any observations about that, or going back, anything else, or going forward? It's like looking back the last couple of weeks, but can look forward also. Sheila.
Oh, I was going to just mention one other thing. I thought it was interesting. It was kind of like a little side note that when they were, you know, investigating voter information, which was very fascinating considering where we're at right now, but that they were advocating and making them move the ballot boxes, you know, where you could turn in your mail-in boxes from the police stations, because people of color aren't comfortable going to police stations. And even though it was like just a small little bullet point, it was an important one for, you know, helping make that all equitable.
Yeah, and that's something that being a white male would totally not even cross my mind. And I think
right, it wouldn't have me either.
Vote. I think that's safety and security, because I interpret police as safety and security, but now I'm recognizing many parts of this country and many people don't interpret police as safety and security. And it was interesting. Lean and I were talking, she was raising it, she can tell us about all the television shows out there that showed police, right, as the heroes, right, all these cop shows out there. And I'm wondering if that's not necessarily accurate, or accurate may not be the word, but is there a different depiction out there that's necessary now? I don't know. Other ideas? Just open your mic. How about Noelle? Jillian, yes, please. Jillian, I don't hear you, Jillian. We don't hear you. You must not have your volume up or something. Your microphone's open. Okay, now. Try now. Still can't hear you. Now try. I think I heard you there. Now try again. You did something. Yeah, I heard you. Hold that down.
How about that?
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry. The phone just kept ringing and I had to adjust my microphone. But anyway, so yeah, so I thought Tiara's presentation was just fantastic. Now, one thing she talked about that I was fascinated about was the stuff about the, I guess, folks that lived in low income housing, and how they were restricted from coming out, you know, and essentially on a lockdown, while other members of the community, like where she lived, and you know, you could just travel as normal. I thought, wow, that is, maybe I didn't know all of this was going on. So that really opened my mind. But I've been talking about housing here a lot lately too, that with disparity, because I think I told you last or yesterday that I was teaching this class, race and ethnicity, and talking about that, how things like that are still going on with the redlining and whatnot. And I couldn't, all of this is just so bizarre to me, because I didn't even realize this was still going on. I could see you talking 30 years ago, but this is still going on now. So that was shocking. And another thing I wanted to comment on, I know years ago, I wanted to have you, David, to come into our school as a guest speaker. But times are a little different, a little bit pricey. So I kind of backed off of that. So now I'm wondering with Zoom, just, I mean, I'm not putting you on a spot, but maybe I might reach out to you again, because maybe, you know, it might be a little different now, and it might be some funds available, you know, something like that.
I've been doing a lot of that lately, talking to student groups and faculty groups. I'm talking to students at Juniata College in Pennsylvania next week, and then the week after the University of Hawaii. So I've been doing a lot of that. And you're in Germanna, right? You're in Germanna Community College. So, you know, you're not that far, but yeah, I mean, we're all adjusting to that. But, you know, we often talk about this stuff about restricted covenants, you know, and so many of you probably know we used to say there was a time, and I don't know if we should say there is a time, like it's still currently in a different form, where, you know, if I owned a piece of property, my covenants, well, I can sell it to anybody, but they can't be Black or Jewish. And so that's the way it was. And so the way you broke into that is there was an interesting story a colleague of mine used to teach with Tulin. Alonzo Smith used to talk about the story, Tulin, if you're listening, in Washington, D.C., where his parents broke that by having, I think, a third party buy the house on their behalf in order to move into a white neighborhood. So you do that kind of third party thing to break that, right? Now, restricted covenants long ago were found illegal, but it's existing in a different way, right? In other words, the way that we're dividing people up is not, maybe more insidious today, right? We have more segregation in this country than we ever had. I mean, Tiara was talking about the difference between Newark and a community 5 miles out, right? So it is there, right? So
Harder to detect.
yeah. Other observations? Yeah, good, Marlia.
Hi, thanks so much. This has been so much information. I really, really appreciate it. I did have one request that I hope we can get some more of the PowerPoint presentations.
Yes,
from
I
the
will reach out to her. Yeah.
for everybody. I mean, for all the days, they were just awesome. But one of the things that I'm already encountering is I have, a lot of friends that are were concerned about the election. And some of them had that realization, hey, this country's demographic is a lot different than I thought it was, which is what I'm feeling as well. And, I hate to be like, bring people down, but now is the time that we have to talk more and more, I think, about these issues, because we don't want to go back to that apathy, which is creating so much of what we're doing. And even my friends that I think are very committed, oh, it's so great, we can really rebuild. And I'm going, it's going to be a challenge. And I think all the things people are talking about, the resilience and everything, I think that's very important right now, is to, in my teaching, I talk a lot more about peace building than I ever have.
So with vulnerability creates opportunity. Do we go back and rebuild what we had before? Or
No.
because we're at this point where it's so much vulnerability, is this the best time
Yeah.
to build differently?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Think about in our own communities. Other ideas. So let's talk about going forward and getting some ideas there in some of the things that you all want to do, maybe things that weren't covered that you'd like to see covered. And you're right. I mean, I'm willing to come in and talk to students, but beyond that, think about, well, let me ask you all what you are doing that might not have been, not that we might have not talked about. Some of you've got programs, some of you, and maybe you were doing something and it came to a grounding halt, so it's going to come back. Tell me some of the things that you all are doing that you like to share out with people that you think may be useful, or things that you're looking for that maybe somebody is doing. So what's going on in your schools? And I may have to pick on people here because I know a lot of you, what you are doing, you don't want to tell us what you're doing. So Jillian, go ahead.
One thing I was working on before the COVID hit was trying to push the work study program a little bit more. I mean, we have the internship, like I know all the schools do, but I always said that many of, at least my students, they just can't afford to take, all that time to go through an internship program. Most of them don't pay anything, and they're long, 40 hours per week, and you're already working as it is and trying to keep your studies up. You have the children, et cetera, et cetera. You just can't participate. It almost is as if the internships were geared towards a select group. A group that could afford to do all these things and had the time. So I thought, but the work study might be good. Or if, I mean, it's not going to be inclusive to everybody, because I know you have to fill out the FAFSA and whatnot, and you had to qualify. But for the students that did qualify, it would help them. A lot of them just never even thought about work study. Or if they thought about it, maybe they thought it didn't pay anything. But what I found from talking to the students, some of those work study positions pay more than some of the, other type of jobs, wherever. And I remember years ago trying to get one of my students to apply for work study, and she said, "No, what are you getting paid?" She said, "Well, I'm like $8 an hour." I said, "Well, I think work study pays more than $8 an hour. You should, and it's right here on campus, and then you could just work around your schedule." But I think that students don't know enough about that. And then so go ahead.
We don't do a good job of sharing that, particularly with people I mean, I go back to this idea of looking at undocumented individuals, right? They are the most careful about the spaces that they're in, the questions they asked about. Now, a lot of you are working in schools where you have a DREAM Act, and so you're not making a distinction between undocumented and documented. But when you're undocumented, you still come in with that mentality. I got to keep a low profile. Even if I'm taking classes here, the low profile is what I need to do, right? Kind of a thing. So they're missing out a lot of these different things, right? Yeah, it's a really good point. Anything else going on in your schools, or anybody want to check on what Julian was saying? Programs that you're doing, activities you're involved in. Fran, I'm going to pick on you. Tell us a little bit about your program, because we haven't really talked too much about programs, and I know Fran's got a great program at Golden West. So tell us about your program.
So we have been, my classes are being offered, like, this semester I'm teaching my social justice class and my intro class, and our numbers are really good because they're online, and I'm getting people from New Hampshire, from while I'm in California,
But back up a little bit, Fran. Fran's got a program in peace studies at Golden
Yes.
West College, right? So she's got a degree program. So yeah, right. Go ahead.
So
I'm sorry, what college was that? What college?
Golden West College.
Okay, and where's
It's in
that?
Huntington Beach.
California.
It's California. It's California. Yeah, it's Huntington Beach, California. It's Surf City, and so I get a lot of surfers in my classes, and so it's an interesting combination of a lot of conservatives. They live in California, in Huntington Beach, and then you have got the surfers, on the other side, and we had recently a change of administration, so things very differently from the previous one. So we are going through some challenges with the new administration, but just my training in peace building has allowed me to actually sustain and perhaps actually I think that the future would be even better for our program at the college because of these partnerships that I'm picking up here or there, and new things, and the new dean that I have been assigned to. He was supposed to kill the program, and he just turned around to be the most awesome a dean that I had. So applying for grants and things like that. So I think the future of the program itself would be, we are going through that dismantling things and then rebuilding it differently. But I think the commitment is there that to let it be, there is enough numbers, particularly in this online environment. We have like a 50 in my classes. And so I think we are thinking that we will do a non-credit certification. So because their problem is all that, well, how many graduates do you have? Your classes are always full and fine, but we don't have enough graduates. Like people, they come in and take these classes because they're interested, or their friends, they suggested, hey, you got to take this class. It transforms your life, it transforms your point of view, you change your majors, or you get to choose your major, you select your major forever if you were confused. Now you know what you're supposed to do. But then they won't declare a major in peace studies, and so the concern of the college is that, well, you don't have the numbers, don't support that. So I think one of the things we have decided to do to partnership with the community and kind of start the certifications, like maybe I'm thinking leadership and conflict transformation, something like that, and even reach out to businesses, reach out to people that, hey, you might already have a degree, but look, it's this is an enhancement to your your degree. So kind of like more skill teaching about conflict transformation and leadership, or not a different kind of leadership, you know what I mean. So we kind of put together this, the consensus is that let's do a certification that people around the world, even people in other countries, they can join in and get the certificate. So that would satisfy this number thing that the administration has about, well, we have, if you have 200 people graduating from psychology, well, I want something like that from peace studies as well. But we're not going to get that. But we're thinking that by creating that nationally and internationally, a lot of people online can potentially, now it's a good time to put a lot of things online and get online certification for a lot of people that they may not be able to come to during the day to school, but then again, they like to learn these type of skills, communication skills, conflict transformation skills, leadership skills that helps the community with the angle of social justice, of course, and the angle of still helping the community. So that's kind of like in the works now.
From a curriculum standpoint, it was always kind of, this is what the big universities of Notre Dame and George Mason's do at the graduate level. And those are good programs and I teach in them, so I know how they work. But it gets me to think about, well, that's not accessible to a lot of people, right? A lot of young people are not going to get to a major four-year institution. So what can we do at community colleges that in many respects can replicate that and offer the same awareness? When Fran talks about skills, this is really peace studies meets conflict resolution is what it really comes down to. It is that this is the conflict resolution, which then often leads then to very specific skill building, facilitation skills and mediation skills and assessment skills and observation skills and those types of things, which are very useful and very helpful. There's a program, not only Fran's program, but on my website, I've got a list of programs. So if you go, I'll put this back in the chat. Most people know my website, but on my website, I've got a list of US and Canadian peacebuilding programs. And these US and Canadian peacebuilding programs include, Fran's, and one of the other ones that's very skill-based is Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, which has a certificate program. It's credit certificate, but it's very skills-based. And it really, they developed the program actually working with the community, the business community. They went to the business community. What do your students need? We need this. They need to be able to assess and to deal and to these different soft skills. Often they built a program around it, and the program's been very successful. So if you go to my website, there's a tab up there that says programs, community college programs. I can help you find it. But that's what Fran's talking about. So some of you are in that's the world that you're in, or that's the direction you've been going. That is, rather than you come to a program like this, and some of you are thinking, well, I want to learn from myself, and then how do I take it back to my students? So a lot of you might be saying, well, I'm taking it back to my students because so I'll change the way I teach them. Maybe it's the pedagogy, it's the approach that I take to teaching. And I know dealing with pedagogy has been a little bit tough in this kind of environment. Or maybe it's the content. That is, maybe I'm going to talk about different things I didn't talk about before I work with my students. But some of you are actually thinking, well, I want to go beyond that, and maybe I want to develop a course or an initiative or something of that nature. I want to do something in a very tangible way. Some of you may be thinking neither, is there something in the way of student activities that I can be doing, right? So what Fran does is she has an annual conference. There are a lot of schools around the United States that have conferences, or they have clubs, and they have different activities going on with their students and so forth. So a lot of it may be relating to those things that they're doing. So they're all different approaches that people can take. And I think I appreciate Fran mentioning, some of you probably even have this book, this is a book that I wrote, it's now 7 years old, which was about community colleges around the United States and what they're doing. And then this book is the one that is most recently looking at just careers. There's a lot that's out there. The challenge is that you're not all connected to each other. And I tell you, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. The chances are, if you came to me, or you went to Fran, or you went to somebody else here and say, I'm thinking about doing this, that, and the other thing, right? I mean, Susan Cushman is doing some great things where she is. The chances are, I can tell you, I can help you cut through some of those things, right? There's things you don't have to do, and there are things that you need to do. Let me help you out, right? So that's the whole idea of getting together like this. Yeah. So other ideas, any other thoughts? Just open your mic. Go ahead. Raise something, share something. Go ahead, Suzanne. Yeah.
Okay, this is slightly off track. I hope you all don't find it too selfish of a question. But when we talk about peace building, and I've learned so many wonderful things and so many great resources, but we often come at it from an open heart and an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, how do we build peace with the 48 to 50% of Americans who don't think there's a problem other than that their guy didn't win? Now that's pretty direct. I could soften that a little bit, but how do we peace build in our own country? How do you, it's, I understand I can introduce them to things and make them aware of things that they don't know about, but I feel like there's a part of us that needs to listen as well as we normally would in peace building. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do we have that dialogue in putting our country back together?
Yeah. And
I know what we need to advance. I know what we've been behind on. I know I don't want to lose any of that momentum, but how do we engage the rest of the folks?
Yeah. And I've been to your school. I mean, I visited Suzanne. She's in Florida. She's right in that red-blue divide. I mean,
I have them and they're upset, and they, I try to ask them how they feel, and they're saying things to me. Y'all won't believe this because you're in maybe different communities, but talked to the butcher this morning. How you doing? I know his business, his politics, and he said, I still have hope. And I'm just like, oh man. I said, well, it's fading, and he said, yeah, but they're just, we got to build peace with these people.
Yeah. So let me stop talking. You all have ideas on this. What would you tell Suzanne in Florida and St. Petersburg? What advice would you offer?
Oh, silence.
Don't be shy. Can't be quiet. Fran, go ahead, Fran.
I think it's always like in peace building, it's about creating that space in which peace can happen. Just like we have heard from all these speakers that they have coming in, and Tiara talked about that. I mean, if you go directly to someone and say, well, just change your mind, this is how it is. I mean, they won't do it. It just won't happen. I think creating a space in which we can kind of like, in peace building, it says that it's, you leave the idea that me versus you should end, and it would be you and I. We put the problem in the middle, and then you would say you and I versus the problem. And so creating a space in which we can go into it, which is safe, and we can say, well, it's you and I versus the problem. Like, I don't want to eliminate you. I don't want to take anything away from you. I don't want, I don't want to take away your lifestyle. I don't want, none of that.
Yeah.
I just, that it's you and I versus the problem. And here is, what is the problem? Let's kind of like, identify what those are, and let's kind of like talk about those rather than, people, they can talk about their side forever. I mean, like if you listen to Israeli and Palestinians, they will have many stories to tell you, and they're all correct. That's, no one is disputing that. But when we are going to a space of peace building, it would be, let's put all of our problems in the middle, and then you and I as one unit, we will look at the problem and resolve it, because we know that by being against each other, that's where we have been, and look, we have nothing to show for it. But if you're going to continue doing that, we would even have less to show for it in the future. But the future of our children depends on this. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's the future. Just like I think Menachem Begin signed the accord with Anwar Sadat in '70s, just because President Carter, I mean, like, he had no intention of signing it. There was really no benefit for him to sign the accord, and it was going to an end without any results until President Carter started, like, they had taken pictures of themselves and all of that. President Carter started signing it for Menachem Begin's granddaughter. And so when he saw those pictures that they had taken together, and there is a signature and addressed to the it just clicked on that this is not about me. This is about, do I want my granddaughter to live in war? And then he shortly after that, he signed a accord with Ambassador together. Well, granted that it's a cold peace, but it is peace.
It's something. Carol, and you wanted to add.
Yeah, I've been trying to give this a lot of thought, as I'm sure all of you have as well. And can you hear me? I'm using earbuds for the first time.
Yeah.
Excellent. And my thinking is that we have to address the fear that's behind the love of the autonomy that has been offered to that, that has been brought up as, I will look after you, follow me. We will overturn the rules. We will overturn the Constitution. I'll protect you because you're so vulnerable. And I think we have to address the vulnerabilities and the fears that a third of the population is feeling.
Yeah.
And until we do that, I don't think we'll ever be able to have a level conversation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking we have to address, even as instructors, we can say to our students, what's the most frightening thing that's going to happen in the next 50 years in your country? And of course, they're going to say our economy, the immigrants are going to come in and take over all of our jobs. And then we can look at some statistics and do what we can to say, does this look like it's heading in that direction? It's the only thing I can think of in terms of what we can do to assuage the fears of our 18-year-olds, 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts or other questions that you might raise right now? Things are on your mind. Hopefully that was helpful, Suzanne. Any other ideas? Any directions you want to go as a community? Once again, someone had raised the idea, is there a Google group or something? That I don't set anything up, but I'm not against having someone. Once again, it's nice to have somebody take something up and wanting to do it. I'm willing to support whatever somebody wants to do. We do this every year. This is the first time we've done this virtual, which was really, from my standpoint, got more people from more diverse who were able to get to Zoom rather than getting to Washington, right? So I do like this. I'm thinking next year, if we're in the post-COVID world, and no one knows for sure, that even if we do a live one, I think we would still do a virtual one too, because I think it's been so good to come to this. But I want to improve the way this is done, and that's for you to let me know. I mean, the model we had of doing it over 3 weekends basically was something that I saw other groups doing versus then an intensive over a couple of days. But maybe doing more intensive is the way you do it. I don't know, So these are things for you to kind of chew on, let me know. But any other thoughts, ideas, suggestions?
So I've been to I think this is maybe my fourth, and it's been wonderful to have people from outside of the region, as much as I have enjoyed the face-to-face.
Yeah.
It's we really weren't able to accommodate people from California. We have a big group from California in this, it's fantastic to hear from people who are, in completely different regions.
Yeah. Yeah, we have Golden West and we have Santa Monica. I think those are our Californians here. So that's great. And there was even somebody from Washington State. I don't think she was able to make it. She had planned on coming, so we would have had her. And I think there were a couple other West Coast people. We had anybody here still from Austin Community College? We had a couple people from Austin Community College were here.
My student is here from actually Norway.
Yeah, Norway, right? Yeah.
Elsa.
She's from here from Norway.
Yeah.
That's good. So, but any other thoughts or observations? What you would like to see happen with community colleges going forward? One of the things that we are as a mutual aid organization of sorts that is, people get stuck on things or they need support. I mean, I know Fran recently came to me. She had this new dean who has now become a champion, but maybe she wasn't so sure at first. And he has become a champion. So I had a conversation with him, 2 weeks ago? I mean, I talked to him on the phone for a little while, and I'm willing to do that, but we do that for each other too, right? It becomes really important. So those are things to do. What else? Observations, please.
Well, I plan on taking this information back. We have those faculty meetings every month.
Mhm.
So I had already been in touch with the dean. So I told him that I will put something together so that and pass it out to all the
Yeah.
faculty. So I think this is great. So I guess going forward, some more things that we could do would be to now to understand that there are internships, with these programs. And again, what I was saying about the work study, you can incorporate the internships and work study like the same. So in other words, you're learning, getting experience, and you can get credit for the class, all combined into one. That's something we've never done before. So I can take that kind of stuff back. We could even put like the agencies that have the internships, we could put it on a list because we have a list of all the agencies that we've got, programs with already established, and establish one with them. So when the students look, oh, what kind of internship could I sign up for? They will be able to choose one of these type of internships that they will Peace. And we can show them to where there's a correlation with the jobs too. So you can do the internship, work study, whatever we're calling it, and get that experience and hopefully maybe get a job. Because like I said, I didn't know about it. So if I don't know, many of them don't know either.
There's a lot, you and I do have to talk, because where's Germana? Are you Fredericksburg? I'm trying to think. Where are you? You're Fredericksburg?
Yeah, but we've got all these campuses, and before all of this happened, we could teach at any of them really. But
No,
my
but
office is at
what's the
Fredericksburg.
main campus of Germana? Is it
That's Fredericksburg.
Yeah, so I've got some folks in Fredericksburg that I know. So you and I should talk some more, about that. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, can I just add something to
Sure.
Julian's point?
Yeah.
I've been teaching for over 25 years, and I'm pretty passionate about trying to get students connected to a career that they will enjoy, as opposed to one that's related to salary, et cetera. So I tried to do the work study, and I tried to do internships, and I dragged them up to Washington once in a while. And the one thing that seems to work, and I've set up a couple of assignments for this, is just job shadowing, is plain and simple job shadowing. So there's almost virtually no time commitment, because you can job shadow for a half a day or even a couple hours. And if I make it into an assignment, then I actually get students, not all of them, some of them are going to go to work with their uncle, but they get out there and find out, especially if they think that they want to be, a sports consultant for, they just can't find it. So it gets that started for them. And it's only an hour, maybe a half a day. And at least they make a couple contacts. And then they get the, they write it up and get the credit for the assignment. But it doesn't take them out of their jobs, out of their worlds, et cetera. And with Zoom, it would be even easier.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Thank you.
I mean, what you got, if you come up with an idea, you're all on the email, like sharing something, writing something up and sharing it with each other. I could see that, or putting it and setting up a Google Drive or something like that. That's a possibility too.
Well, and that kind of dovetails with it.
Good, Rich.
Sorry. Well, no, that dovetails with an idea that had sort of been percolating over the past couple of weeks with me. When I did this before in 2013, and shame on me for not doing it more often, I remember, I believe at the U.S. Institute of Peace, they handed out like an educator's toolkit. Yeah. And it was a book. We could collaborate on something like that, because we could create our own toolkit that comes out of this. It could be updated on an annual basis, or that would include readings, case studies, activities, assignments, modules, units, plug and play sort of things that would be really, really cool and useful, I think, to instructors, both at the classroom level, but also in a sort of an employee development level. Mm-hmm. The 4 or 5 of us at Harper who've joined this year are part of something called the Social Justice Leadership Certificate, which is a capacity building staff development effort at the school, a year-long project-based, focusing on social justice and being able to cultivating leadership capacity to lead social justice initiatives on campus. But I think a peace building unit, and I'm gonna call on my buddies here to maybe report back to the larger group, larger cohort on that. But anyway, so there's just a bunch of really neat ideas, I think, going around.
I think that's really timely, especially since we're all quarantined, so we're putting a lot of thought into what we're doing. And you could do something, once again, that transcends Harper College. I mean, right now, I've got 10 community colleges sitting in front of me, right? And so every one of us could contribute something. And so can you develop something at Harper, Harper taking the lead, and a lot of schools could be using it, right? You know, I think about the book that I did 7 years ago at USIP, and a lot of those programs are still doing really well. Some of them have not. But something that kind of continues that work in a more applied way, you know, and seeing actually what people can do in their classrooms. And, you know, one of the things that I'm always struck by, I always remind my four-year college colleagues, is that when you're talking about teaching about peace building, this is not purely a social science humanities endeavor, right? We have nursing faculty here, trade faculty, you know, tech, welding. I mean, I've had conversations with welding faculty. I actually have a colleague at Arizona Western College in Pima, who has an organization called Welders Beyond Borders, that he takes students to Mexico to teach welding. And he's a big advocate of this kind of intercultural peace building kind of things that are going on. So only community colleges can do that too, you know? So yeah, I like what Rich is saying. Other ideas, any other thoughts? So what's going to happen from this point on is I'll get you, I've got to talk to Catherine about, she is kind of not editing, but kind of pulling up the sessions that you all will get links to. Now, I know they're long and so forth. So, but you know, you can use them as you wish. I will also make sure that I collect all the PowerPoints. I'll do that this week also. Some folks have already sent me PowerPoints, some haven't. Most everybody will, and I'll get that to you also. You know, one of the things that we don't have in a conference like this is that, you know, there's no handouts, there's no little tchotchkes that you get kind of a thing. And I kind of miss that stuff, actually, little tchotchkes. I must tell you that I take pens and so, but maybe that's a good thing. We're in a post-Chotsky world. We don't need those things anymore, right? Because they were a waste anyhow of our environment. So everything will be virtual at this point. So, but I'll get, you know, the PowerPoints I'll get out to you. If you got ideas that you want to continue to collaborate with each other, you can start with me or send the email. Suzanne had talked about this idea of maybe meeting quarterly or something like that, getting together and having maybe a standing conversation, you know, 4 times a year. I could host that, but better is that you could host it yourself. Like you could rotate it, like this month it's this school, this month is this school, this month is this school, going around that way. And then, you know, these are all, I always want to remind faculty, you have to be strategic about this all. It's not just a matter of what they're doing in their school, it's setting their school apart so that the higher ups can hear that, right? So if you can say, yeah, I'm collaborating with Harper College and here I am in this community college somewhere else and we're doing these things across community colleges, that stuff that goes to your dean, goes to your vice president, goes to your president, may go to your board, right? And I got to tell you, this is all part of the game. I know some people would say, oh, I don't play that game, but no, we all have to play that game. Some of you are thumbing up with me, you know how this all works.
I can add to that, to David.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
You know, David knows that I've had my share of roadblocks. I'm at Nassau.
Yeah.
And we have a human rights studies project, and I developed the course in Intro to Peace Studies to add to the project. but it is continually frustrating. That's why I put in the chat earlier, oh, that numbers game, Fran, that you mentioned, that, you know, that the deans and the VPs are saying, well, what kind of numbers can you show me? You've got, you know, a couple of sections that run, and where does it end up? What's certifiable that your peace studies or your human rights studies students can do? And as I've tried to convey to them, as David has helped me understand it through his books, frankly, is that they can do any one of a number of wonderful things across the disciplines. Without getting into detail of where Nassau is at the moment with it, I can only echo what David's saying about you know, it's like you almost have to find where your college is. What kind of nomenclature do they use, and how can you plug in what you love to do and what you know is great in this field to it? You know, my home degree is in literature, my PhD is in literature, but I, you know, minoring in women and gender studies, I came to human rights and peace studies kind of through the back door of women and gender studies, right? And I think we all have stories like that if we don't have a PhD from George Mason in peace studies. But and that may be somewhat of the stumbling block at some of our colleges. They're small, and we don't have the resources perhaps to develop a full program. But what I've learned is that I'm able to plug in different ways. So their big shtick, there's two big shticks at Nassau. One is applied learning, and the other one is civic engagement. So I think to myself, okay, I can plug right into that. And
Yeah.
so I've learned that flexibility from David's books, from these seminars. And I think we all probably have a different story about how we're doing peace building within the kind of lexicon of our college, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
all I can say is power on, everybody. And one little thing I'd love to throw out to the group, because I'd love feedback if people come from a humanities background like myself and somewhat social science, but I've been thinking that, okay, if I'll never see the peace studies program at my college that I dream of, what about bringing peace studies and peace building into required courses that will never go away, like English 101, like Intro to Literature, like first year seminars that I'm teaching over at Adelphi, which are like rock solid. So I'm beginning to think of ways to bring more peace studies into foundational courses that don't go away.
Yeah, the gen ed strategy.
Yes.
No. But Susan is saying something that's very valuable. You don't have to call it peace studies. You know, it may walk like a duck and look like a duck, but you call it a beaver. I don't know. What's the difference? Right? I mean, yeah. I mean, you want to be able to use the right nomenclature, but nomenclature is very culturally and environmentally specific, right? And in some schools, peace studies will fly. In some schools, you're gonna have to call it civic engagement and civic education for people to go with it. That's okay. It's not what we call it, it's what we do, right? So Susan is right there, yeah, on that, yeah. Any other closing thoughts? Because we're a little bit after 2 and I want to be respectful of people's time. Anything anybody wants to add or put it in the chat box? Like I said, I'll get back to you on email at the beginning of the week. I want to think a little bit more about what Suzanne Preston had talked about, this idea of getting together periodically, maybe thinking about that. And then Rich's idea about putting together some sort of a journal or something online or something like that, that I would do. And Rich, if you and I want to talk about that some more at some point, I could kind of open that up to the rest of the people who've come through this, of which a lot of the more active folks are not here today just because it's a Saturday. Shirin Khosrapur and Katie Zanoni, who was here before, and there are a lot of people who would like both what Rich is suggesting and what Suzanne is suggesting, I think. So, all right. Is that good for everybody? All right. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure. One of the things that I did not do this year is that I did not issue certificates, because I've done that in the past. If anybody really needs something like that, I don't know if I'd issue a certificate, but some sort of confirmation that you need for professional development. It works differently everywhere. I don't know what people need. Just let me know and we can come up with something. The Forage Center will send something out, since we do that anyhow at the Forage Center for folks. Okay. Reading the last chats here. Yeah, Marlia wants to help Rich out. Great. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Joanne. I'm glad that you were here from Harper College and everyone. Okay. All right. We'll call it a day then. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are. Then we'll be in touch by email, and then we'll just go from there. So have a peace out, I guess. It's not peace out, but continue the peace, right? Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, David. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. This was
Thank
awesome.
you, everyone. It was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much.